That's my kind of filth. I love it. Joining me now in studio to discuss the new season of Dirty Jobs.
Well, there have been many that I've said, no, I'd rather not do that, but my only job on that show is to try, right? So if I did anything smart in this whole crazy...
He's the man who made America look beneath the surface, literally. For years, Mike Rowe climbed into sewers, walked into slaughterhouses, and stood shoulder to shoulder with the forgotten workforce. With a calm voice, rolled-up sleeves, and an unfiltered lens on the lives most of us overlook, Dirty Jobs became more than a TV show. It became a mirror held up to the soul of the working class. But now something has changed. And just moments ago, Mike Rowe made an announcement that has stunned his loyal followers and broken the hearts of millions who grew up watching him get his hands dirty. It wasn't fame that made Mike Rowe iconic. It was his unwavering respect for the everyday American, the plumber, the farmer, the welder, the gravedigger. But the truth he's finally sharing isn't about the jobs. It's about the man behind them. And it's not just unexpected. It's heartbreaking. So what did Mike Rowe just reveal? Why now? And what does it mean for the legacy of Dirty Jobs and the future of the man who gave dignity to work no one else wanted? You're about to hear everything. From the struggles he kept hidden to the truth about the pain that's followed him for years. And once you hear it, you'll never see Mike Rowe or the American workforce the same way again. From the very first episode of Dirty Jobs, Mike Rowe didn't just narrate the struggles of working-class Americans. He became one of them, crawling through sludge, slaughtering hogs, scraping rotting grease from the ceilings of fast-food kitchens. He put himself into the thick of what most people avoided, all while cracking a smile and making it seem like a shared joke with the viewer. But behind that self-deprecating humor and the deep, commanding voice was a man carrying far more than dirt and sweat. He was carrying a burden no one saw coming, the emotional toll of becoming the spokesperson for a part of America most people had forgotten. For nearly 2 decades, Mike Rowe built a platform not just on television, but in the hearts of millions who saw their own fathers, brothers, and selves reflected in those jobs. But while the country watched him highlight the dignity of dirty work, they didn't see the emotional exhaustion, the mental health toll, and the pressure of trying to represent an entire culture of labor. He was receiving thousands of letters a month, from coal miners struggling with black lung, from widows of loggers, from teenagers raised in towns where opportunity died decades ago. Mike read every single one, and over time it began to change him. He wasn't just narrating reality, he was absorbing it. And now, at 62, Mike has revealed that those years left more scars than anyone realized. In a recent emotionally raw statement, Mike admitted, "I wanted to give a voice to the people who didn't have one. But somewhere along the way, I stopped using my own." He confessed that while he was spotlighting the backbreaking labor of others, he was neglecting his own well-being. The endless travel, the physical dangers, the emotional weight of carrying so many stories, it wore him down. But what broke him wasn't the grime, it was the guilt. The guilt of knowing that no matter how many stories he told, millions were still being ignored. That for every plumber he shook hands with on camera, there were thousands more still unseen, still unheard. Mike admitted that he fell into a kind of emotional numbness, unable to separate the man from the mission. And now, the news he's finally breaking isn't about ratings, retirement, or a television contract. It's about a personal reckoning, one that forced him to step back, look at the man in the mirror, and ask himself if the cost had been too high. Because even heroes need saving, and Mike Rowe, in all his strength and humility, is finally letting the world see that even the strongest voices need a moment to rest. This isn't the end of Mike's story, but it may be the most human chapter yet. One where he stops carrying the world's weight on his back and finally allows himself the space to heal. After years of shining a spotlight on America's most invisible workers, Mike Rowe has turned that light inward, and what he's discovered has led to a decision no one saw coming. In his recent statement, Mike didn't just reveal the emotional toll his journey has taken, he revealed that he's stepping away from the grind, not out of defeat, but out of necessity. For nearly 2 decades, he's been the camera lens through which America saw the dignity of sweat, of danger, of real work. But now, he's asking a question he's never asked before. What does life look like when you're no longer carrying everyone else's story? The answer, as he tells it, isn't a complete disappearance. Mike Rowe isn't retiring, but he is redefining. Instead of chasing the next filthy job or traveling from one forgotten town to the next, he's shifting his focus to what he calls the invisible labor within. For years, he's been an advocate for skilled trades, workforce development, and the power of blue-collar education, but now, Mike wants to advocate for something deeper: mental health in the labor community, emotional resilience, and the unseen cost of being the one who always shows up. His new mission isn't about ratings, it's about repairing what's quietly broken. In upcoming appearances and behind-the-scenes projects, he's planning a series focused not on dirty jobs, but dirty truths, stories about suicide rates in the trades, about generational trauma in working-class homes, and about the stigma men face when they admit they're exhausted. And this time, Mike won't just be the narrator, he'll be the example. He's speaking more openly about his own struggles with depression, imposter syndrome, and the creeping fear that, despite all his efforts, he still hasn't done enough. In one recent interview, he said, "I've spent 20 years telling other people's stories, but I forgot mine mattered too." And that shift in perspective is changing everything. Friends close to Mike say he's become quieter lately, more reflective, less concerned about being the face of a movement, and more focused on being a healthy man behind the scenes. He's leaning into his music more, reconnecting with family, and rediscovering the parts of himself that were buried beneath the miles, the scripts, and the silence. This isn't a breakdown, it's a reset. And in typical Mike Rowe fashion, he's using it to help others. Because even as he steps away from the relentless pace of dirty jobs, he's creating space for new conversations, ones that ask not just what we do for work, but what that work does to us. And in that honesty, Mike is once again doing what he does best, holding up a mirror to America. Not with judgment, not with sensationalism, but with the same quiet dignity he always brought to the sewer, the farm, or the factory floor. This chapter is different. It's softer. It's slower. But it may be the most important one yet. Because if Mike Rowe, the man who never flinched at rats, rot, or ridicule, can admit he's tired, maybe it gives the rest of us permission to do the same. While Dirty Jobs was praised for its raw authenticity and down-to-earth charm, what most viewers never saw was how each job left a mark, not just on Mike Rowe's hands, but on his heart. Over the years, Mike immersed himself in hundreds of dangerous, grueling, and often heartbreaking professions, many of them performed by people who had no choice, who inherited the labor or who clung to the work because nothing else was left. What started as a mission to honor them soon became something much heavier, a constant crushing exposure to other people's pain. Mike heard the stories firsthand. The father of 3 who lost a limb in a machine accident and still showed up to work. The widow running her late husband's dairy farm alone, just to keep food on the table. The former soldier turned oil rig worker, who said the loneliness of the job was quieter than the war, but just as cold. These were not scripted moments. These were confessions, shared in break rooms, on the back of rusted trucks, over lukewarm coffee and calloused handshakes. And for years, Mike carried them like silent weights, never talking about how those stories affected him, because he didn't think he had the right. He wasn't the one losing sleep over mounting bills. He wasn't the one inhaling chemical fumes for 10 hours a day. He wasn't the one burying co-workers after on-site accidents. But what he didn't realize until much later was that bearing witness to suffering, without processing it, creates its own kind of wound. In his most recent reflection, Mike finally admitted that he began experiencing symptoms of vicarious trauma, emotional numbness, anxiety, bursts of unexplained anger, and a growing sense of guilt that no matter how many stories he told, it would never be enough to fix the system. He would wake in hotel rooms at 3 a.m., feeling disoriented, disheartened, like he was drowning in other people's stories without ever being allowed to surface for air. And in time, the pressure began to change him. Those who know Mike best say they noticed the signs: longer silences, fewer laughs, a certain fatigue behind the eyes that no amount of rest could cure. He stopped playing music for a while. He stopped writing for himself. He kept smiling for the camera, but privately, he was unraveling. The emotional residue from those years in the trenches had seeped too deep. But Mike, in his usual quiet dignity, never made it about himself. Until now. Now he's telling the truth, not to seek sympathy, but to start a new conversation. One about what it means to be the one who listens, the one who shoulders the weight, the one who tells the stories everyone else is too afraid to touch. Because even empathy has a cost. And Mike Rowe, the man who once stood waist-deep in human waste without blinking, is finally admitting that what broke him wasn't the filth. It was the humanity. The raw, brutal, beautiful humanity of people who fight every day to survive, unseen. And he carried all of it, until it almost crushed him. Now, standing at the edge of 63, Mike Rowe isn't walking away from his work. He's walking deeper into what it means. After decades of crawling through muck, walking into danger, and giving a voice to the voiceless, Mike has reached a place of quiet reckoning. He doesn't want applause. He doesn't want pity. What he wants, what he's finally allowed himself to want, is peace. And maybe more importantly, purpose without performance. In his most recent interviews and speeches, there's a stillness in his words, a tone of a man who has seen the cost of carrying a nation's silent labor and has chosen to keep going. Not because he has to, but because he finally knows how to do it without losing himself. The truth is, Mike Rowe's greatest contribution wasn't television. It wasn't the Emmy nominations or the viral clips of him gagging in sewers. It was something harder to define: dignity.
He gave dignity to men and women who had been written off as background noise in America's story.
He made the forgotten visible. He reminded millions that value isn't found in job titles or college degrees, but in showing up, day after day, for the work no one wants to do. That's the legacy he hopes to leave behind, not as a host, but as a human being. And that legacy isn't built on a brand or a show. It's built on connection. The kind that doesn't fade when the cameras turn off. The kind that says, "You matter. I see you. I respect what you do." But Mike knows the work isn't finished. That's why, even as he steps away from the physical grind, he's leaning into new ways to tell these stories. Slower, deeper, more intentional. Podcasts, letters, speaking engagements, scholarships through his Mike Rowe Works Foundation. Not just about dirty jobs, but about the human soul behind them. And in the silence he's learning to embrace, Mike says he's hearing things he never had time to before. His own voice, his own fears, his own dreams outside the spotlight. He's writing again. He's playing music again. And for the first time in decades, he's not just honoring others, he's healing himself. He hopes his journey shows people that strength isn't about holding it all together. It's about knowing when to let go, to rest, and to speak the truth even when your voice shakes. Because in a world that demands performance, honesty becomes revolutionary. So as Mike Rowe breaks the news that he's changing course, it's not a goodbye, it's a rebirth. A man who has carried thousands of stories is finally telling his own. And maybe that's the dirtiest job of all. Digging through your own pain to find what's worth saving. But as always, Mike's not afraid to get dirty. And this time, he's not doing it for ratings. He's doing it for himself. And for every person who has ever felt unseen, unheard, and exhausted. The cameras may fade, the shows may end, but Mike Rowe's legacy is already written. In sweat, in silence, and in the hearts of those he never forgot.